Hello, I'm Dr. Mark Braidwood, founder of LearnAnatomyByDrawing.com, and this is a video on drawing better lines for beginners. Now, if you are studying anatomy with me, you would have heard me say that we're really focusing on the process rather than the outcome. We shouldn't care too much about how our drawings look, and that's because we're using drawing to better learn anatomy. But that is true. And while that is true, it's still worthwhile if you have the time and the inclination to learn to draw better lines, because you'll enjoy drawing more and get more out of it probably. And for everyone else, why do you care about line quality? It's an important part of drawing nicely. So if we use a musician as an example, they practice their scales, they practice their notes, the sound that they can get out of the instrument to get a better sound out of the instrument. So one musician might sound better than another playing the same song because their note quality is better. So it's much the same with drawing. Your lines are the foundation of any illustration that you do. So we're going to talk about which body part you use to draw lines effectively. We're going to talk about things like pressure and ghosting, warm-ups to help you practice all of this. And lastly, I want to address something that I call the fear. Okay, so firstly, which part of the body do we use to draw? Tempting, I think, first for beginners is to only use their fingertips. Now, there is a lot of fine motor control in fingertips. That's true, and we use the fingertips for fine detail. Okay, so if I'm sort of doing some close, small, fine detail hatching here, that's largely coming from my fingers. All right, maybe textures, that sort of thing, and that's fine. But as soon as you try and draw anything bigger, you start to run into problems. So, for example, if I was trying to draw a long line all the way down here with my fingertips, I can't. And you notice that it starts to curve, or I need to draw it in different stages, and that does not work. Okay, so we keep the fine motor in our fingers for fine control. Excuse me. Now the next part you can draw is your wrist. Now if you fix your wrist, you get a nice curve from that. Okay, that's pretty much how we use it. You can start to use your wrist for a bit of a straight line, but you need to adjust with your fingers, and that's not easy to do. Likewise with the elbow, if you fix your elbow, you can get a nice big curve, but really useful for big stuff, but not so much for small. The last and the best place to practice your drawing is from your shoulder, because you can get nice big movements in every direction without any limitation. Okay, so your elbow is off the page and your whole arm is moving from the elbow. So for example, if I want to draw a nice long straight line, I can draw it from my elbow without any limitations. Okay, so what I want you to do is practice from your elbow. It doesn't feel natural from your shoulder. It doesn't feel natural to begin with, but you will get used to it. All right, so the next thing is pressure. Whenever possible, draw lightly, because you can always come back and improve the line or accept the line if you want to, if you like how it worked out, or adjust it. But if you draw heavily, that's the line you end up with. Especially with a pencil, you can't erase a hard line properly, and you end up with that, and you can't get around that problem. Okay, so I just locked the focus there. The next thing I want to talk about is ghosting. Now, ghosting is where we practice a line. Okay, so if I want to, say for example, draw a line between two, I know that my line needs to be that long, and I'm drawing freely from my shoulder, I'm going to practice that line a bit. Okay, so I'm just going to go over it like this, and when I'm feeling like, yep, I'm getting it, I'll do it. Okay, and ghosting is really useful. We'll come back to that during our warm-ups. Okay, so that leads us to warm-ups actually. So the first warm-up exercise where you start to practice all of this stuff that I use, so it's great to warm up for a drawing session or just to doodle and practice, is what I call lattice. And this is all coming from the shoulder. So I'm going to draw a series of parallel lines. Now I want them to be roughly the same distance apart. Okay, and I want to make them the same length if possible, and I'm going to try and make close enough to a box. Okay. So when I think that I've got a box there, all right. And then I'm going to draw downwards, and you will find that you'll be better at some. The shoulder will feel more natural some ways than another, and that's okay. That's why we're practicing. And then crossways, and again, just trying to go from here to here with the shoulder. lastly this way, which is the way I find the most challenging. Now you can of course just tilt your page if you're trying to get a straight line a different way, but sometimes it's not really easy to do. You'll notice this has a nice sort of sketch quality to it. It looks pretty good actually, you know, it has that sketching feeling because the line quality is there. Okay, so and you can also practice your your point A to point B lines as well. So that's the lattice, join the dots. Now the next one I'll try is to show you is ellipses, and ellipses and circles are really hard. They take a long time to get going. We'd all love to be able to draw them perfectly anytime we want, but they take work. So don't beat yourself up if you're struggling, but they're really good to practice. So firstly, I stack ellipses on top of each other, and ghosting is really important here, okay? Just get the feeling, okay? And I want the lines to touch each other, so it teaches you control as well, so that you can place the ellipse where you want it. So I just stack them on top of each other like that. Now ellipses have a long axis and a short axis, and they are symmetrical around both of those. Okay, so you've got to make sure that your ellipse is not doing this. That is not an ellipse. Okay. So that's the ellipses. Circles are quite similar. We always go circles. This is a... Oh, sorry, before I go on to... I do practice my ellipses in other directions. And you will find, again, you will find you're better at some than others. So that's useful for, say, drawing a car tire. Okay, next circles. Ghosting is really important here too. And as I say, these are really challenging, so don't worry about it at first, just practice through. And I try and get the edges of my circles touching. This is an exercise I call bubbles. You can make them small and big, like this. And then I'll go in and try and do concentric. Really good exercise for control. Or I might try and touch the bottom. Whoops. Okay, like that. So that's ellipses and cylinders. Now, ellipses and circles. Onto cylinders. So now they can use these to practice making a cylinder, which is an ellipse. Oops, let's try that again. And then two converging lines and another cylinder, like that. Or you can, if you want, turn these into cylinders. Another good exercise with these is to draw a straight line. And then because of this symmetry here, I'm going to use this as my short axis of a bunch of ellipses. So you want to try and draw them like this. And make sure that these are equal. All right, the last exercise worth practicing is called, well, it's basically cubes. Now there's a lot of things there about perspective. I'm not going to go into it here, but in 2-point perspective, which is where we're seeing sort of three faces of a box, you always have this corner Y. My vertical lines are all parallel, appear parallel, but these lines are actually parallel, but they don't appear parallel because the box is going off into the distance. And so these lines are converging. So at some point off into the distance, these should converge, okay, if I've done it correctly. And likewise this one here. And this one here is converging on that one like this. And this one here is converging on that one like that. Okay. So it's worthwhile to practice these and to draw through, which means putting in the other lines. So this line here is converging with and parallel to those. And this line here is, because it's parallel, will again converge off into the distance, okay? Why boxes are so important is because they give you the three planes in a drawing, height, width and depth. And so for example, if you put a light source here, they give you the shadows. So this will be the darkest, next lightest and lightest there. So if you can draw good cylinders and good boxes, It's really worth doing. I wish I could remember where it was from, but I remember seeing someone online having a conversation about drawing good boxes with their art teacher, and they were complaining about having to draw boxes and how much they should practice them, and the art teacher turned around and said, well, if you can't draw a good box, how do you expect to draw something complex? If you can't draw something as simple as a box well, how are you going to draw something complex? And that's always stuck with me. So it's worth practicing. Okay, lastly, I want to talk about what I call the fear. So what is the fear? It's an uncomfortable feeling you get when you're starting something new, okay? Particularly where you could be judged on your output. That bad feeling can manifest as anxiety, embarrassment, vulnerability, shame, okay? And there's two ways to resolve that. Your brain wants to resolve that uncomfortable feeling, and it will try to. And there's two ways to do that, one easy and one hard. The easy way is by walking away from the pencil and resolving that uncomfortable feeling by distracting yourself with something else, like social media or cleaning up your room. The harder way is by pushing through and sitting with the fear and moving through it and recognizing it as the first step to overcoming it. Why does it matter? Because it leads to avoidance, okay? It leads to you don't improve unless you push up against and past your limitations. And so if you avoid doing that, you won't ever improve, and it becomes self-fulfilling. Okay, so how do we get rid of it? How do we push through it? Well, it's helpful, I find, to reframe mistakes as a gift. Okay, they are signposts toward success. So if you're doing your circles like this, or just not getting your circles right, then that is telling you that that's what you need to work on. You have not yet mastered a half decent circle, so stick with that until you do. Okay, they highlight what you don't know and show you what you need to be able to do to move forward. It's a form of feedback that tells you what you need to do to improve. So if every time you come up against a mistake, you push through it and you work on it, it then becomes like a signpost or a path towards success. And if you resolve every one of these issues as you move on and you say, okay, now I'm going to do portraits and I can't quite do a portrait, so I'm going to push through that. As you resolve those, you end up at your destination of learning to draw. All right, well, I hope that's helpful. I have another video out which explains a framework for learning how to draw, which I think you'll find useful, and we'll put some of this into context, so be sure to check that out. I'm Dr. Mark Braidwood from LearnAnatomyByDrawing.com, and happy drawing.